The U.S. military claims that they were fired at and these were combatants. It's very difficult to get to the heart of the matter, but I did see the photos of the people who were killed, and they certainly were students. That much we know. But one of the problems with reporting these sorts of stories is that so much of this happens in areas that are inaccessible to reporters, and so you have to, it's sort of a he said, she said thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny, my previous guest knows somebody who's on their way to go and try to investigate and get to the bottom of that particular story, so I hope that we'll be able to get more of that. I'm interested in the pictures that you saw. You say in the picture, I believe if I understood you right, you said they were definitely students. The picture that I saw, I don't know if this is accurate or not, they may have been students, but certainly none of them were as young as 12 years old in the picture that I saw of the dead men laying out there.
Oh, that's right. I don't think I saw anybody as young as 12 either. All the people I saw were young teenagers, but they all had beards as well, and it's unlikely that a 12-year-old would have a beard.
Yeah, not that it's okay to put a 16-year-old on his knees and shoot him in the back of the head, but
right.
That's the story that's coming out of the Karzai government and the local authorities there, is that these kids were as young as 6th grade, and I just want to know what the truth is there. It's not like our government has a problem shooting 6th graders with missiles. I don't know if it's really much different to put them on their knees and execute them. But is this the kind of thing, I guess more broadly speaking, are you hearing about people being executed out there in the field?
Well, first I just wanted to clarify to people, too, that in the Afghan countryside, people are illiterate, most people are illiterate, and most people don't even know their ages. So it's very difficult to get an accurate estimate of age from people. And also, a 6th grader means many different things because there's people as old as 18 and as young as 10 that are all in the same class in Afghanistan, the nature of it. But I've heard cases of people being executed. It's very difficult to prove any of this. There's one case that I talked about in my story in which somebody was detained and then 2 people were detained and their bodies were found in handcuffs near a U.S. base 2 days later. Now, it's difficult to say what actually happened, but what we do know is what the political effect of that is on the ground, and that is that people, the locals, think that the Americans killed them, and that's done more than anything to undermine any sort of support that the Americans could garner there.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, another thing that you bring up in your article is that the NATO rules say that the American or other forces there, other NATO forces there, can only hold prisoners for 96 hours, but you say that they found a loophole right around that.
Oh, that's right. Those rules apply only to the conventional U.S. military forces that are part of the NATO military force there. But there's a separate force, which is the Special Operations Forces, and that's the Green Berets, Navy SEALs, and the like. And the rules don't really apply to them. And so one of the things that they've done is hand over the detainees to Special Operations Forces. Another thing they've done is hand over detainees to Afghan forces, because, of course, the rules don't apply to Afghan forces either. After a few days, and they'll give the detainees back to the U.S. forces. We'll hold them for another 96 hours, and that will continue until the interrogators feel that they have what they want.
Yeah, well, and then, of course, I guess it seems like from, reading this article, whatever it is that they want out of these people, or whatever it is that they end up getting, seems to be the worst intelligence. I mean, as Engelhardt points out in his introduction here at original.antiwar.com/Engelhardt, where we have your article, Obama's Secret Prisons, this is the same geniuses who let a suicide bomber right into a room full of 7 of them, or more, kill them all. They do nothing apparently except, I guess it's the CIA in Pakistan and more the military in Afghanistan supposedly, but all they do is shoot missiles at civilians all day. I mean, is there anybody in the Special Operations Command or the CIA or anything who actually knows what they're doing at all, or they're just kind of reenacting their Operation Phoenix fantasies out there on strangers, or what?
Well, I will say that it is an extraordinarily difficult terrain, human terrain there, and one of the things that the U.S. forces, CIA, Special Operations Forces, what happens to them often is they get caught in the web of the local politics. For example, in some of the cases I described in my story where houses were raided, the reason those houses were raided was because U.S. forces got a tip from other Afghans in the village, and there may be long-standing rivalries. This may be a case where I don't like my neighbor, and I have some dispute with him, and I can go and tell the U.S. forces, well, guess what? That guy is Al-Qaeda or Taliban, so you should go after him. And the intelligence is usually at that level, which is why so many of the people who get picked up are often wrongfully so.
Well, now, I guess to go back to the question of how much support the occupation has, it does seem like it's kind of broken down along the lines of the old Civil War, of the Northern Alliance versus the Pashtun-backed Taliban and all that. And I guess for the most part, at least in the media, and really I guess to hear the generals talk at the press conferences and stuff, the insurgents are the Taliban are the insurgents. That's the same thing. Although I guess it is true, isn't it, that the insurgency basically is made up of the Pashtuns, but then again, you also say that there were a lot of support among them for the occupation, at least for a while there, until we blew it.
Well, that's right. And first, the insurgency is mostly made up of Pashtuns, and it's mostly Pashtuns, if anybody, that gives any support to the insurgency. So outside of Pashtun areas, there's almost no insurgent presence. And also, there's no real war being fought outside of Pashtun areas. It's almost entirely, the war today is almost entirely being fought in half the country, essentially. And in the other half of the country where there's no war, those other ethnic minorities view the U.S. military as a sort of buffer between them and the Pashtuns. So it's a very complicated situation that we've gotten ourselves into.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I'm still fascinated by the idea that any of them would have welcomed us, any of the Pashtun tribesmen, since our government apparently has aligned against them on the side of the other, the Northern Alliance type factions. I'm kind of just surprised that any of them would have welcomed our presence at all. Not, that night raids would have to be, the deal breaker is kind of a shock, to tell you the truth.
Well, you have to remember that the Taliban regime wasn't the most popular government in the world, and so a lot of people, even in the Pashtun South, thought that, well, once the Taliban are gone and the Americans come, that they'll bring some prosperity. And that was the biggest complaint that Pashtun men at least had with the Taliban, which is that there were no jobs, no development. The country didn't move forward at all in those 6 or 7 years that the Taliban were in power. And people associated the Americans with wealth and prosperity. And there was also a sense for, of course, our government supported the Mujahideen, which is the insurgency that fought against the Soviets in the 80s. And those people were still popular. Some of them were still popular in the Pashtun areas. And so they thought, well, the Americans supported them then, and so they're a natural ally. And therefore, they welcomed them when they came in 2001, welcomed them with open arms.
Mm-hmm. Well, and after all, Karzai is a Pashtun, although, a city boy and not a country guy, but I guess there's that, if it's something. Do you think that the policy really is to, and this is something that's been in the news lately, is to try to work a deal with the Taliban? Karzai wants to work a deal with them sooner, and apparently the Obama administration is opening to working a deal with them, but they want to have, a few big offensives first, at least, or maybe as long as another year and a half worth of fighting, and then try to deal with them. What do you think is going to go on there?
I think there's two things. The Carter administration, it seems, is willing to deal with the leadership of the Taliban, and I think it's doing that because it views the insurgency as an existential threat. Whereas Washington is not there yet. I think they are more interested in peeling off the lower rank and file of the insurgency, but they're not at a point where they want to negotiate with the very leadership. And there's still a sense in Washington that there'll be this military surge that'll put the Taliban back on their heels, and then the situation will be ripe for exploiting, where they can split the insurgents, take away the rank and file, the ones that are more amenable to deals, and isolate the leadership so that they could either be killed or made politically irrelevant.
Well, it seems like part of that strategy is, like, for example, this new offensive that I'm not sure if I understand why. Maybe you can help explain why, if you understand. This new offensive that's about to start in Helmand, they're announcing it weeks in advance. They're saying, hey, if you're Taliban, go home and pretend not to be Taliban for a couple of days because we're coming. What's going on there?
Yeah. I think the last thing they want to see is a big firefight. They'd rather see the Taliban melt away and not fight. And it's part of the whole thinking of counterinsurgency, which is that you want to protect the civilian population. So the thinking is that if they just scare the Taliban and tell them to go away, we can take the town It'll be a huge political victory if we can retake the town, especially without any bullets fired, and then the population won't be put in harm's way, and then they'll support us.